Welcome back everyone to the last part of today's event. I'm trying to be visible for everyone. I hope all of you had a refreshing, inspiring coffee break. We're off to the panel discussion now. The panel discussion focusing on the role of open science in teaching and education. And please welcome our panelists from left to right. Jeroen Bosman. Jeroen is an open science specialist and geoscience librarian at Utrecht University Library. His expertise and main fields of interest are open science and open access in all academic fields. At Utrecht University, he is also a member of the working group on rewards and recognition, and he's the co-leader of a project called 101 Innovations in Scholarly Communication. And that project surveys and charts developments in scholarly communication, research workflow tools, and practices. Next to him, sitting Kjelda Glimmerveen. Kjelda is a research master student at the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies, and her research focuses on the intersection of religion, heritage, and popular culture, and very interesting. Last year, she was a student member of the faculty's board, and she's also working together with heritage organizations to get younger generations more involved in religion and heritage studies. Then we've got Jolien Mouw. Welcome. She's assistant professor at the Faculty of Behavioural and Social Sciences and also a member of the Academy here in Groningen. Research and teaching focuses on educational innovations, instructional design of interactive learning, and purposeful implementation of educational technologies, such as support learning processes. That's quite a mouthful, but also interesting. Hope to hear some more about that. She's specifically interested in the use of simulation technologies such as augmented or virtual reality, online blended hybrid teacher professionalization. Then you may have noticed that it's not Benjamin Baby-Shaw on the on the panel. Unfortunately, Benjamin is sick and couldn't make it today, so we send our best wishes for a speedy recovery. And we welcome our fabulous program manager, Mira. I'm guessing all of you know her. Any introduction? Welcome, Mira. And last but not least, our library colleague, Mira, who will be moderating the discussion this afternoon. Mira is an academic information specialist on open education, and she leads the open education pillar and the open science program as well. She's engaged in building services and infrastructures to support UG teachers in the area of open educational resources, open textbook publishing, and related issues. And her background is in international relations, political science, education. And with that, I'll hand over to Mira. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy it.
Yes, thank you, Babette. Thanks everyone for joining us. And we're really pleased to have such a diverse and varied panel representing all walks of life, different academic roles that you can have at the university. And I will briefly introduce the topic. You can see the infographic here on the screen representing the many ways and many the extent of open science that spans educational materials, but also the entire research process and also the values, the underlying values lying as a principle behind it all of transparency, accessibility, reliability, interconnectedness, and inclusivity, aiming for the benefit of society and for the benefit of science. So open science is many things, and we can define it differently. And we would like to discuss with you what role does open science play in university education, which opportunities and challenges are there, how do we educate the next generations of open academics, but also next generations of responsible and critically thinking citizens, our future, and how do we unleash the transformative potential that the education has for the advancement of our society. So we would like to address these questions with our esteemed panel members, but we will also be opening the floor to taking your questions later. First of all, we will give the word to each panel member to reflect on the angle from which they approach open science in education and teaching. And our question is, well, same as you could read there on the flip chart. what does being an open academic mean to you? Are you one? And in what way are you or are you not one yet? Who would like to start? Jolien, go ahead, please.
So, well, I really appreciate, first of all, that you say it's about being an open academic. So it's more than just research. Our core business is not just doing research, it's also translating our knowledge into society and, more specific, teaching the next generation. So it's also about open education. And for me, in that sense, an open academic would mean that I purposely think about how can I enrich my teaching or learning processes and which other materials can I use. Should it not be more than just reading books? I mean, we know students don't read books, right? So there's a variety of resources and possibilities out there, but we need to harvest them and put them into practice. In that sense, I'm there in mind and spirit, but I'm not an open academic yet, because there are many, many things that I encounter in which I struggle. For example, I have a virtual reality classroom, which I would love to put available open source, but all of a sudden I have all the lawyers pointing at me like, you think about this and that. And I was like, oh, no. So yes, I would like to be, but not there yet.
Clear enough. Thank you. Jeroen, would you like to follow?
Yeah, sure. So I think my point of view as an open science program manager is more an eclectic or more broad view on open science and education. I think the open science principles can be applied, well, to research, but also to teaching. And I think it's actually done too little yet. So great kudos for you who are already, well, more far along than I am. So with regards to the question, are you an open academic? I would say it's not a dichotomous principle in the sense that it's not whether you're open or not. So you're somewhere in between, right? I think well, with regard to teaching, I see myself still at the beginning in a sense that I didn't share my slides yet using the educational resources platform, the SERF tool, the EduSources tool. But yeah, with regard to research, I think I'm a little bit more advanced, but hey, there's still much to learn. Yeah, so I think that's my stand.
Yeah, it's a continuum after all. It's not either or black and white indeed.
Yeah, exactly. And that has many facets. I mean, it's not only the educational resources thing, but for example, co-creation I like a lot. There are so many great examples. I learned them through Mira, so that's great. Yeah. Many facets that we can do better.
Thank you. Would you like to follow Jeroen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'm very thank you for having me at least in Groningen. And for me, open science and open education is just a part of being open generally in life. Being open about your values, being open about your approaches, being open about sharing your resources, whether that is just for sharing resources with your neighbors or with other people in your community. But of course, in science and within the academic setting, you're doing that a little bit more explicit, with also with explicit goals. And I really love to do it sometimes in a quite strict sense. So really trying to push the boundaries of open by forcing myself to be open, even if it takes more time, even if it is harder. Even if I have to deny myself some opportunities, because when I'm asked to share some views in a certain magazine, for instance, for Nature, they call me and I say, will it be open access? No, not. Well, then I'm not doing it. Oh, then well, maybe we can do it. So just trying to push that boundary by being also a little bit strict for yourself. Of course, I'm in a very luxury position, maybe because I'm, as a librarian, I'm not, my publications are not being counted, etc. And I'm in a luxury position because in Utrecht, we are being valued for being open, and we are really changing the reward and incentive system. So that is not a barrier for me.
Yeah. Inspiring. Thank you, Kjelda.
Yes, well, I love the question of whether I am an open academic because I don't really think I'm an academic.
Yes.
Yes, because I'm a master's student, so I wouldn't say I'm an open academic yet. But I do think it's good to think about it even in early stages, very, very early stages of your career. Even though we talked a lot today about like software and technical stuff, and I don't know anything about that. I'm very firmly in the humanities aspect. But I do love to write, and I love popular scientific texts, and I think that also plays a really big role in open science, because even if you just make all literature open access, there's many people who don't want to or can't really read that. And so I really like to work on more of the translation, I guess, to a wider audience. And I really enjoyed that. So I also did an internship with the University Library, actually, which was about digitalizing part of the special collections. And then my job was to research some books and write popular scientific texts about that, basically blogs. And kind of talk about, okay, well, these books, why should you be interested in it? You know, how is it related to like local heritage and your own history? And I think a lot more people are interested in science as soon as there is a good story behind it. So that's something that I really like to work on at the moment, and something that I would love to continue to work on as I hopefully advance my career.
Really good to hear. So the societal engagement side of things is something that inspires you as well.
Yeah, and I think that's also a bit of a selfish thing. I'm from the Faculty of Religious Studies, and that's something that's quite misunderstood by the broader public, I'd say. So I think it's also very important for some more niche faculties and research areas to popularize yourself and to make yourself more understandable to a wider public.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, my next question is a bit more provocative, maybe. I will play the advocate of the devil. And, you know, I'm a firm believer in open education. But then, can we really open up our education? Will the university still exist if everything or a lot of it is truly open, available online and in open access? What are your thoughts on that? Jolien.
Well, I think that.
No,
okay. Well, I think you already touched upon it.
Exactly.
I'm going to take one of your colleagues as an example, Julia. Well, for example, I know that you can make really good cookies, right? I tasted them. So, what would happen if you would write down your recipe and I would try to make it? Well, chances are mine are not as good as yours. So unless you are standing next to me and guiding me through each step, and we say, no, Jolien, that's way too much sugar or salt or whatever you put in, and think about my oven and how to regulate it, I will never succeed in making these kinds of nice cookies, right? So it's just our materials that we share, or our philosophies or ideas. We're prompting others to think along or to advance our own works. But it's still the interaction within the lecture room or feedback sessions that make and shape learning processes. So no, I'm not afraid of it, actually.
Can I add to that? Because I think the university was really afraid when we started out the open science program, and they found out that one of our pillars would be open education. The first questions that we got from the board, from the university board, was, what? Are you going to sell out all our, I mean, that's our how you say, verdienmodel model? That's, what are you going to do? How does this work? There was really a lot of anxiety there. So yeah, I think these kind of things are really good to discuss, and I completely agree that we need guidance, and we are still worth things. And as Matt Kohler also said, you still have a degree of freedom in the sense of how you frame it, that you can still be open enough to get other people an impression of what your course looks like or what the recipe is, maybe, and still add with the guidance. Yeah.
Yes, maybe after that, and also maybe after that, and also perhaps there are two sides to this. So I really very much agree that students don't go to university just because of those educational resources. No, they go to get the interaction, to get access to the labs, to get that peer pressure, to get that status of that paper at the end. Well, you might have second thoughts about that. But on the other hand, I think that, yes, it is also a bonus if some people, because of the availability of open educational resources, can teach themselves or can from it in other contexts, whereas they otherwise wouldn't be able to do that. People without the money, people without the resources, people at small institutions, yes, and they will profit from what we share, of course, but that's the intention. But no, it won't turn away students, it won't hurt the competitive model of universities. Not at all.
Won't affect our market share in any way, will it?
No.
If anything, I think it will attract more students because you can see the glimpse of what is being taught. How to.
Interested in hearing what Kjelda has to say in these.
Well, I was actually talking about this to one of my fellow students in a break, but I think it does open up the question of, as a student, what exactly are you paying for your tuition? Like, are you paying for it to get skills and to get, live classes, for example, or are you also partly paying to get access to that literature? And if all of that literature or even some classes that are being taught are all available online, then should your tuition be lower? Maybe would be nice, but yeah, I think that is a question that maybe university should also think about.
Yeah, fair enough. Good point. Indeed, thank you. How can we make these open practices, open science practices trickle into the curriculum? We saw from Matt Kohler's presentation how they're doing it at Campus Friesland, but this is one of the programs. What do you think would be applicable in your particular scenarios, cases, faculties, universities? Where would we begin? Yes, please, go ahead again.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the program, of course. And I was thinking about my own faculty, which is amazing. But I think in humanities, at least at our faculty, at least in my program of religious studies, we already do talk a lot about the kind of the position of the scholar in society, which is also a big part of open science, and also about kind of to challenge the assumptions of science being this superior, objective thing, ethically neutral, all these things. We do talk about that a lot. And we also do some assignments that I think are helpful. Like we had assignments where we had to kind of translate our findings into popular text or record podcasts about it or something to translate it to a wider audience, which I think is helpful. But in humanities, of course, you don't have a lot of the technical aspects. So I would have no idea how to approach making publications open access or how to somehow incorporate, I don't know, software stuff into the program. So I think humanities can probably learn from the exact sciences and the other way around in that way.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, Kjelda, that this should be a bottom-up approach, a top-down approach, a combination of the two from your perspective as a student?
I think it's always best to have a combination of those approaches. I think it would be best if you could incorporate basically all levels. If teachers have ideas, if students have ideas, if the university has policy that can help, if the government has policy that can help, I think it would be best if there's a balance between all levels.
Yeah, thank you. Same question to the rest of you, the rest of the panel.
Yeah. So if I can add, I think recognition and rewards also is a very important component. I think Jeroen, because Utrecht is very advanced in recognition and rewards debate, but I think that's a very important component because all the researchers and teachers specifically are burdened with work. There's much work pressure, and there is not many rewards to be open in your teaching materials or to practice open pedagogy yet. So hopefully we can change that in the coming years, but as it is now, it's not. And I agree that policy is also a very important. I think it maybe relates to each other also a bit. As soon as there's policy, you also have this incentive to adhere to the policy.
And
but of course it's a combination.
Yeah, and who should be advocating for this change in the R&R, in the recognition and rewards system?
Yes, well, that's a tricky question because, of course, it should be, I think, bottom up in the sense that teachers who do it now should be more seen, so put in the spotlight for doing things as they do it now, because they can be good examples of how to do it or how to approach it. But of course, yeah, top down, I hope that it will change. And we see a little bit of change nationally, and also debate about recognition awards, but yeah, it's a difficult question. At least I think the pioneers who are pioneering now play an important role. But I think the universities should shape it as well. But how, that's also something that I struggle with.
Yeah, still an open
If
question.
someone else has a.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering, did top-down ever work for anything? Well, maybe in terms of supporting people or creating time, but that time should be created. Or if you talk about exemplifying nice practices, then at least you should know where to send them or how to send them around. Or
Can I react to when does the top-down work? Because I do think that it works for the laggers. So you have pioneers who start things, and then for those who, the majority of teachers or researchers or anyone are the ones who are waiting to see how the other pioneers are doing and waiting for, I think, more external incentives or the top-down regulations saying, hey, you have to be open in your teaching. And then they're like, okay, well, I think it's, yeah, I don't want to be.
I disagree. So,
Well, I mean, that's really nice.
but in the end, if you would force people to open up their teaching and put something online, and they have to, it will be not too much of quality over there. Yeah, if you force people to make available whatever resources they are using right now, and you just put it online. But from my perspective, being open in my educational resources means that I have to think about how I structure my lecture, that if I have a certain illustration that I picked because of, well, for example, I teach about educational design. We have these clear rules and guidelines about when or not to use the picture. So if I would just upload my slides and say, oh, you can change everything, then you would completely ruin my carefully crafted high quality lesson, right? So you have to think about, okay, this slide, I put this picture here because it illustrates this. So it's not just putting stuff there, it's thinking why and how making choices, and also sharing those choices in sort of pedagogy. So I don't think that forcing people to share something.
It's a carrot and stick,
Yeah.
right?
If I may, I think there is some middle ground. Because top down doesn't have to equate to forcing. It can of course also be making sure that you facilitate open practices, that you make open practices the easiest option. If it is the easiest option, it's just that the sort of default option becomes the default option for people to choose. And also, of course, you can offer a lot of training and incentives, and really just money. If you have a seed fund or micro grants or whatever you call them for projects to innovate on applying open practices in education, that will certainly help. And of course, you can showcase what comes out of them. Yeah, that's the main thing, I guess. And for instance, for creating open textbooks, if you have a few experts at the institution available that people can call and say, well, I have this manuscript, I want to turn it into an open textbook and not send it to Pearson or McGraw-Hill to turn it into a $300 textbook. But I lack the expertise, the technology to really create this. I have the ideas. I know about the pedagogy, the didactics in the for this topic, but I lack the technical skills to really create it. Can I hire someone for 2 months to do that together with me? So that is money, and that is also a little bit top down. What's a combination of top down and bottom up?
I mean, if you send an email to Mouw or to Martijn and they say, oh, you're doing it all wrong, and then I think, okay. So, I mean, we need a lot of them to actually start working. Yeah, that maybe.
No, thank you for that. And what do you think success would look like? When will we have achieved, if ever, the successful integration of open science and open principles into our education and teaching? What would that look like for you, and what kind of impact would you like to see?
Perfect question for you.
I don't know.
Neither do we.
Well, I'm not sure is there ever a perfect answer.
Just just some goal in the future, light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, it will be a goal that I'm not the only one actually using any sources. I mean, so
Working on it.
if I, yeah, well, then I publish something there and nothing happens, but it would be really great if we also create a community of sharing within YouTube, but also across. I mean, it's really a waste of time, money, even brains, capacity, that we just keep reinventing the same wheel over and over in all different universities that are all using basically the same materials in their courses, right? I mean, why can't we just share these and then take the action out? That will be success for me.
So sustainable approach would be a success. Yeah, thank you. Kjelda.
I would say that it's a success when we don't need this anymore. We don't need an open science program, a pillar on open education, the discussion that we have here, because it's just the way we do it, things that
Part of the DNA.
exactly, it's part of the DNA. I think then it's success.
So when you retire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jeroen, what do you think? That would put you out of job as well.
Yes, maybe two indicators of success for me would be first, along the lines of what Phil said, if students starting a PhD don't have to be taught on all kinds of open science practices anymore, because they already got that during their bachelor's and master's. Another measure of success is a little bit more complicated, and that is the stance of academics in society. So if people graduate or leave their studies and take on a job or a role in society, if they know how to apply open approaches and open practices where they are then, that would be for me a matter of success. But that also, for instance, includes the being armed. I don't like the word armed. Having also the soft skills to remain open in a society that's increasingly hostile towards, generally sometimes towards science, but especially in certain discussions in social media, etc. Having the skills as an academic to remain open and to remain and to continue sharing your approach, sharing your materials. That's a skill that I would love to see really consolidated for future generations of students, so that they can be more successful in their roles, in their jobs, while being very much open.
Yeah, open and critical at the same time. Yeah. Kjelda, would you like to add?
Yes. I mean, it's such a broad topic that I think it's kind of hard to also say what success looks like, but something to add, I think, is also to have a more broadly open attitude amongst scholars. So, for example, again, with this idea of science being like the ultimate pinnacle of enlightenment or something, and instead also be more open to like indigenous and local knowledge systems and to take that more seriously, I think that would also be great.
Yeah. Sounds good. In order to achieve all that, we cannot omit the student element, the student agency, of course. And well, we have to think about the sufficient academic rewarding of students for taking open science practices and openness in general. So Kjelda, I would like to start with you. What do you think would be the successful, sort of sufficient rewarding of students successfully uptaking these practices?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and also kind of complicated, because I mean, I would be really interested to hear what you have to say as well. But I think it would be easy to translate that, like a reward system, into like grading, for example, make this part of grades. But I think you should also be wary of turning this topic into a competition for students, because that's kind of the opposite of what you want when it comes to open science, right? It should be collaborative. So I don't think students should be competing with each other over who's the most open sciencey person. And also, you don't want it to be like an extra source of stress, also not for academic staff, by the way, that you're also going to be judged for this. And a lot of students and staff already feel like the programs are very taxing. So I think that's kind of something to keep in mind. Yes, that was what I was thinking of, but I'm really interested in what you think of this.
Thanks, a valuable perspective indeed. Jeroen, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, maybe, especially for education, turn this into something that gives the students the idea that they are liberated by it. And that they can make connections, for instance, also between various courses, and work together between disciplines, have more interdisciplinarity also in our education, and have sort of mixed groups, especially around projects that are also, of course, ideally directly relevant to society, working on specific questions and challenges that have a concrete outcome, not only a learning outcome, but a real outcome for society during their studies. And not that you learn something that you then, after your studies, can apply to something that is relevant to society. Being relevant during your studies for society, it can be very motivating. So trying to think of ways to make this sort of more liberation than an extra burden or an extra barrier or things that you have to check.
Yeah, and having listened to our keynote speaker, Matt Calder, who's trying to implement that in Campus Friesland, would you say that they're on the way to getting there to motivate these students to be those liberated learners?
Yes, yes, I think so. Of course, I haven't been there, but then there is, of course, very much the personal element. So it's not only about the students, but also about the teaching staff, of course. And that interplay, and of course that he is very enthusiastic about it and knows how to get that across and how to take people, students with him. And you don't always have that. That is just the human element that's so important.
Thank you. Please, would you like to add? Not to say you don't have to.
Well, I think my perspective would be that the elements of what you mentioned, that it's important for the society, that's a really rewarding, or at least when I think of back of the time when I was a student myself, it would be very rewarding knowing that my thesis, for example, wouldn't be a file drawer and would be actually helpful for society. I think that's rewarding in a sense in itself. But I also think the collaborative aspect is very important. So team assignments that students already get experience in learning or working together collaboratively on a project. And in terms of open science, I think an important element is also that if we would set up like more, well, we would change the system a little bit, for example, for thesis, and then work in consortia or bigger groups. For the quantitative research, you would also have a benefit in a sense that you have better power studies. So a big problem with this right now is that we have a lot of underpowered studies. So every student on itself does data collection, but actually the data isn't enough to do properly test the hypotheses. So in that sense, I would see, well, a change in the system with respect to thesis, especially, where it gets more rewarding to work together on a bigger question, which is important to society.
Indeed. Yeah, and related to that, what shortcomings of the current educational system do you think open practices or adopting more open practices in education could help resolve, if any? Or would they highlight the shortcomings of the current? And I'm looking at the educationalist among us, Jolien.
Well, are there really shortcomings that one thing can solve? And is there something to be solved? I think that open educational resources offer us an opportunity to actually share what we're already good at. That we have high quality teaching, that we have really nice materials that are up to date, we are constantly integrated with research that we keep doing, that we interplay with whatever comes at the news and try to jump on. We constantly advance, and if we can share that, we can actually highlight our strengths and our qualities and not see it as some kind of, we need to solve something. But maybe we can raise the spotlight to ourselves and also show that teaching and engaging with students in co-creation are really important processes for our functioning, and share that with others. So no, I don't see shortcomings that should be solved, but in terms of
the strength.
Upgrading, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Good point. Thank you. Jeroen.
Yeah, well, maybe just to make this also very, very practical and concrete, one of the shortcomings would be perhaps those lessons, those presentations by professors that just have too many slides with just bullets of text. And that relates to a kind of hobby part of me, and that is making sure that in the context of open education, we have more high quality open visualizations and clip art available for just presentations and lessons, because currently that is difficult. Many people, including myself, that are always on the lookout for high quality visualizations to use in my slides. I know that if I want to create it myself, it will cost me 2 days for one slide to make a high quality visualization at least. And if I look online, there's nothing with an open license. And I have it almost every week, several times a week sometimes. So if in the context of open education, we can make sure, even within the Netherlands, or even within an institution, to create a library of high quality open visualizations on things that are quite often used in many strands of science, be it statistics, be it metabolism, be it the hydrological cycle, be it whatever, to have those available and adaptable would be very nice.
I know
that's a very concrete thing that you can solve it. Make it easy for people to have good visualizations in their training, in their teaching.
Indeed. I know our colleagues from Maastricht University and a few other medical centers across the country are working on it in the biomedical sphere. So they're creating a large repository archive of biomedical images. That would be a good example.
That's it.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, thank you. Okay, now which current issues in the topic or in the integration of open science into education and teaching should be addressed first of all? And I guess maybe Jeroen, you're working on the support side as well, and you would be, maybe you would have ideas coming up to your mind first. Would you like to mention something? Not only in questions to you, to everyone else, but
specifically, but in a broad sense, I think yes, support services. That's the thing that you want to start first.
As most urgent.
As most urgent, in a sense that I feel that researchers and teachers are getting more and more asked for being more open in their both their research and their teaching. But as it is now, I'm not sure how it is at the other universities. We still have very limited resources for support. I mean, we are lucky enough to have you advertising the whole
and the team
and the whole open education team, luckily. But I guess that's not the case for every university, and I think it's very important if you want your staff to get going. There has to be support how they are going to do things. Not sure if you feel the same way.
Yes, of course. Of course, support is important, but also just grabbing the opportunities to really sort of get across the basics of open science and open education in teaching. There's so many opportunities in the curriculum, whether it is the first course in which students have to write a paper for themselves and search for information for that paper, or the first course on methodology, or the information literacy class, often organized by librarians. And really then getting a few things across. I think one very important thing would be to make sure that students know how to assess all the kinds of information that they encounter online, especially coming out of open science. So all those early outputs, pre-registration, they can encounter that online. Preprints, working papers, they can encounter that online. All that code and data, they can encounter that online, and they see that, and they might say, this is relevant, this is about my subject. What kind of thing is this that I'm looking at? Are we teaching students that?
Quality check?
No,
more like information.
well, a quality check might be part of it, but just understanding what is it that I'm looking at. Another thing which is very basic would be to get across the idea of the open science mindset. So the mindset of reusing, modifying, and sharing again, and why that is useful, and also as an analogy of that, the importance of understanding and using and applying open licenses to things that you create yourself or things that you use from others. Those are some of the basics that we can easily make a part of the curriculum.
And Jeroen, how can we facilitate that as a university? Who should be facilitating that?
Well, I'm a librarian. Use the power and force and time of librarians. They love to do some of this stuff, and they could extend their information literacy classes for those studies in those areas of university where there is no other option. Ideally, it should be just embedded in any of the courses they take when they first need it, when it's first relevant. But if not, it can be a part of information literacy classes. That is one part. And of course, you can have very good information on that just on your university website.
And then it will trickle into the curriculum.
Yeah.
Good one. Good. Ladies, any of you would like to say a few words? What do you think the current issues are the most urgent, and how can we address them?
Well, I think it would be really nice to have also embedded experts within the faculty, but also within each separate departments, because educational sciences is not the same as psychology or sociology. So the demands that we have for our materials can be completely different from someone who's teaching physics or anything. So it would also be really helpful if these supporters know our curriculum and can really think about which opportunities they see and how they will fit.
Yeah, tailored advice, indeed. Yeah, good one, indeed. Kjelda, do you have an opinion or an idea or a suggestion for us? Because I'm also asking this for a reason. to help, yeah, exactly. Asking for friends to help us make the services better, support services better.
Well, I don't have actually what I had in mind is not super concrete, so I don't know if it's very helpful. But I think for students, it is really important to kind of start with the mindset, I'd say, and also reflecting on the position of scholars in society. Yeah, the connection with society that we already talked about. Also, so that you can decrease the concern that many students have of how their study actually translates into a non-academic context, or are you just getting knowledge and do you just have to do a PhD now? But yeah, I think that connection to society is really important, and the self-critical mindset, I'd say, which I don't know. I think that in our faculty we do talk about it a lot, and then we're all very anxious about that, but it comes with it, I think. But I don't know when it's like the other faculties, but I do think it's important to talk about.
Yes, definitely. And we have a few minutes for some final remarks. If you were to address the audience and well, leave a few words that would linger with them on the topic, what would you say? This is your minute for each of you.
No,
I like that.
Okay, I didn't have enough time to think about this. Some concluding thoughts. I think it's a very important topic that we should invest more in, and I think it should be on all the different layers that we discussed. I mean, it should be made possible that we indulge ourselves in open education, but there should also be, I think, a community which, well, is of peers and of colleagues who help each other. Policy is also an important one. But to come back to my first one, I think the recognition and awards is a very, very important one to get it going and to, I don't know what the English translation is, but to het laten beklijven. To make it stick.
Yeah. Thank you.
So putting us on the spot. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So my advice would be to be proud of yourself and really think about your own courses and what do you have to share. Why can you actually teach 250 students in front of you, but why are you afraid to share your materials with others? And is it something in you, or is it actually your teaching that's bad? I guess it's not bad, right? So what is actually the thing that holds you back? And maybe there is someone who can actually help you overcome that, either practicalities or maybe some problems.
Yeah, open and honest. I like that. Yeah, Kjelda.
I mean, I'm biased, but I would say including students is very important. And thanks for inviting me to this also. But yeah, I think it's good to include students in the decision making, but also just in kind of an ongoing dialogue. That also that there should be room for doubt and discussion and concerns of students during classes. And I think it's good to keep that in an ongoing conversation with students.
Couldn't agree more, definitely. And Jeroen, last but not least.
That's an impossible question, Mira. Of course. But I would like again to maybe mention something very concrete, and that relates to making sure that you relate to the way students are thinking and the kind of resources also they are using. And I'm now going to mention the word Wikipedia and Wikimedia and Wikidata, because that is a kind of model, especially Wikipedia, that students understand and know, where you have the notion of verifiability, that is very much traceable, that each and every character that anyone has entered at any point can be traced to its origin. There are discussions around the articles that are being placed there. You can modify it, anyone can modify it. So, and also practically, so that's a sort of model that you can use as a mirror. I'm not saying that we should copy that exactly in science, but it's a model that you can use. But also, you can use it more practically, of course, in education, as a source, but also as something that you can add to in classes. That you can correct or improve on or elaborate articles and add resources there, and that can be a very nice assignment for students. Despite, and I'm aware of that, despite all the discussions around the inclusivity of the Wikipedia community, but there are very good examples also documented online of how teachers have used Wikipedia, but also Wikidata in their courses and classes. Just to mention something very concrete.
Yeah, thank you. Great elevator pitches. Thank you very much, our esteemed panel. And now we would like to open the floor to questions, to your questions from the audience. Please go ahead. Feel free to approach the topic from any side that is relevant to you and your background.
Thank you so much for all your contributions. I have a question for Jeroen specifically, actually, because in the beginning you said that you sometimes set boundaries for yourself, that you don't engage with non-closed access, non-open access initiatives, and that you are being rewarded for open access, but are you also being rewarded for actively staying away from closed access? Because I think it's a fine line.
Well, maybe it's more general. I am being rewarded for promoting openness. And I think in my role, it's important to see what are the boundaries of openness, because I want to know where really those barriers are, and if we can break them down. What happens if you don't accept the barriers? So just having those discussions, and that can be with publishers, but it's not only about publishing, it can be about anything. Open can also be about, as I always say, whether or not you want to be in a full wide male panel. Luckily, I'm not. So it's about all aspects of openness, and just thinking about that and thinking for yourself: do I want that? And what do I want to give up to sort of be a little bit more principled about it? But it's also something that I have the opportunity to sort of play with and test and experiment.
True, and I think you're also in a position to practice what you preach.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So indeed, but it's also for doing reviewing just now during the session. Sorry for that. I submitted a review, but you can say I don't do that review if the data is not available, or if there's no acceptable data availability statements, then I'm not doing the review.
I do that. I declare.
Yeah.
I signed
So,
the agreement.
And sometimes it also makes it a little bit easier for you, because you have the opportunity to really decline one of those review requests that you get.
Thanks.
If you'll excuse me, I have two questions, right? First one is, well, it's based on an analogy Dr. Jolien gave at the very start. And said that, well, let's say your friend makes very nice cookies and you get a recipe and then you can't perform as well. So that's a very good argument for open education. But let's take another analogy where you work in a family-owned pizza store, right? And you have this very good recipe for sauce. But conversely, across the street, there's another pizza store competing with you, and your families hate each other, right? Now, you're both committed to your art. However, you can't exactly share your recipe now. So this brings me to the point that it would be nice if the academic community across the world were just one big team and they were dedicated to science. And in that sense, there's no contradictions. But often science and research are subject to other factors such as economic factors, political factors. So in that sense, do you think that open science is something that can facilitate more collaboration in between the academic community in the world, or is it that open science can only work when academic community in the world first gets united, and then you can do it?
Okay, interesting analogy also with pizzas. So apparently summer food. Well, it's not that you don't get your credits. It's you putting it out there. You determine which parts of your recipe or your materials will be shared, how they can be shared, how they can be adapted, and what you do or would not like to see being done with it. So in that sense, you putting your recipe out there will actually mean that everyone will know your recipe. And if they then see you or whatever, I think they will prefer you over the competing family. So you could also use it to your benefits in that sense. But maybe I'm just a really naive person. I just like collaborating and I just like to put the word out there and I really like teaching. And I'm really not at all worried about someone else taking advantage of it. So maybe it's also a change of perspective or maybe something bound to the discipline you're in. Yeah, I'm not sure how this would ever bite me in that sense, or lower my chances of getting something else. Because actually, right now I'm applying for other scholarships or anything that actually require me to do this in a certain way to make my materials that I develop open source available on the long term even. So yeah, I don't see the hesitation there.
And if I may add to this food analogy, you also have to keep in mind the factor that both family-owned pizza places are publicly funded. And they both use publicly funded flour, publicly funded salami, pineapples, and all that. I don't know, whatever you fancy. I like cheese. That's all publicly funded too. And although, of course, I understand there still remains competition, but that is also an important factor to consider when deciding whether you can and want to share the recipe or not.
Yes, and there's also a difference that the pizza makers in science did an oath and said, like, yes, we have a common goal. We want the best research there to be out there, the highest quality that I can do. And I think, yeah, that's different from society and marketing. But this was only your first question, right?
I'm curious to your second.
But also, it is publicly funded, but what if it's different publics? Like, in a sense, if there's a university in China and if there's a university here, they're both funded by different economies with different goals. And there's often the concern that, let's say, you as a researcher would like some more control over how your research is used. So how do you even prevent that if you just have open science? I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of information over this, so I have doubts and I'm just laying it out.
No, really good question.
But no, that's not my second question. That's just all of the question. Right. But no, I'll ask the second one if you. All right. So it's been so I've now heard two arguments for open science. One was that, of course, it will make education accessible for everyone, and it'll sort of democratize education and it'll be more accessible, and that's good. However, Dr. Mira also made this claim that not only will open science, the open science will benefit the university because it, by by putting some things out there, it will attract more students because it will show them what the university has to offer. So will open science, at least at this university in the future, be structured in a way that you as a normal person can just learn the things without ever coming to university? Or will it be structured in a way that just tells you enough about the thing, but you really need to come to university to actually make use of your education?
I know, but I think none of us has a globe to look into the future. So this is a very difficult question. But I do think that things are changing. So I do think the system, that the whole movement of open science and opening up will eventually affect the system, in a sense what you say, that it's more open and gives students or potential students more insight into the curriculum that's already there. But how that exactly looks like, or yeah, I think it's hard to tell.
Well, personally, I would be super grateful if I have a student entering my classroom that was actually able to find my materials, that they were stored in some GitHub or any source platform that they really probably won't know. So I guess that right now, at least in our field, that the sharing is mostly directed towards teachers and not per se the rest of the world. Yes, it could be. I mean, if you're going to make a knowledge kit or anything on YouTube, sure it is. But it's more like you're sharing your lesson plans or your blueprints. But it's always an interaction with students, with the teacher, with the classroom, the environment, the discussions that you bring in. That will actually shape the learning processes in the long term. So yes, please students, go and find it and prepare it for my lecture using my slides that are already there, so we can actually dive in deep instead of repeating what's in the book. Maybe. That would be nice.
Jeroen, Kjelda, do you have any opinions on the topic?
I think we also already talked about it a little bit with the question of will the university still exist? Because I think basically right now the main issue is to make the knowledge kind of a common good, but it's a lot more difficult to make like skills a common good. So even if you put the literature out there, or you still need the vocabulary, and then even if you have the vocabulary, then how are you going to apply it if you don't have the skills that are being taught in university? So I think it would be really difficult to somehow make everything that you learn in university just open access to everyone. So yeah, I would say that is my answer. But what do I know?
Well, maybe, sorry. In primary education, it's a common good. You cannot find another webpage like www.jolien.com or .nl. They are all already taken, right? So every teacher in primary education has their own website sharing Mouwwerkjes. Sorry, help me out, guys. Origami things or materials, or especially in the lower grades, you cannot teach if you don't have the wide availability of these materials. Yeah, that's lesson 1 in primary education if you want to become a teacher, actually. So how is that different? Why should we then let our kids go to school? They can also find everything online, right?
It's required by law that they go to school.
It's required by law that they go to school. But it is a good question to keep us thinking about why we want to share and what purpose and to what extent.
And to where that leads, of course. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Maybe I want to.
Oh, sorry, Jeroen. Sorry.
Maybe just on this topic, because it's of course everything relates to everything, and this is part of a very complex multifaceted transition, very much akin to the transition towards renewable energy systems with all of the same mechanisms and same types of discussions. But of course, it begs the question: what makes the university for the university? When will it be successful in education? Is that if you attract a large number of students? No, we don't want them because we can't afford to give them any housing. We don't have housing for them. Is that if we are high up in rankings? We know about the rankings and how they come about and what they actually stand for. Is that what we're aiming for? especially if we also know that, especially in the Netherlands, we are, as institutions, quite rich and privileged. We can come very successfully out of this transition, because any transition costs money, costs resources, costs learning skills, etc. It's actually, to a certain extent, more expensive to become open during those transition years. We have the privilege and the money and the skills to make a success of that transition towards open. Many other institutions probably have not. Maybe institutions in Paramaribo or Surabaya. And as I always say, our university ranking in the Netherlands is also the university ranking of universities in Paramaribo and Surabaya, because of our learning past. So it's all, don't want to make it even bigger, but that is part of the discussion. So we want to be being open and sharing your materials and say, well, it's nice, all our materials are open, all our articles are, all our data are open. So we have ticked all the boxes. It is, of course, about collaboration, making sure that people can do something with that, and that you do that ideally together with also with local knowledge if it is an international issue that you're dealing with, etc. So yes, I do think I do want to make the issue big.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering my question. Then we want to ask you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I know we're over time, but yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I have one of those annoying comments / questions, but it's just also kind of a request because I want to highlight one hurdle of open science that I faced during my PhD and still do now, and it doesn't have to do with just the desire to withhold sharing. It's just that it's hard to share certain things. For example, in IT in general, you're incentivized to share code, right? And it kind of doesn't tell the whole story because your code is kind of your workbench. It might be really dirty, right? And once you finish the study and you have results, it's not like I don't want to share it because I'm afraid of somebody reproducing it. I know I also don't think I said anything controversial in the paper, so forth. But I could feel that, well, who's gonna want to reproduce this? It's very niche. 1, 2, it's very, I have very dirty code because it was like a workbench. It was a kind of a lot of prototyping. And at that point where I'm submitting a paper, either, maybe the institute or the grant that pays my money says, well, you need to share the code, or the journal, if it's a good one. I either spend a lot of time cleaning it up and nobody's going to support me in the university. And this is kind of a software job. So I'm doing science, I'm doing research. So these are really competing goals that take time. So I don't get the support, or I just throw like a GitHub link in there, which is sort of comes back to me if somebody actually opens it, because it's not really well maintained and so on. So this is support that I would love to have throughout my career if I could continue in science, because I want to move on to the next thing. I don't want to stay and polish, like basically do something that people are paid a lot of money to do outside the academia. So if that would be possible to be offered by the university, it would be a dream for many people, I think. I don't know, yeah. Any thoughts? Would it be possible?
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
Yes. I have to say the word.
No. I think you're making a very valid point, and I think there is a lot of colleagues that struggle with the same thing, that we don't get space or don't get time to actually do open science things, whether it's working on a code or submitting things to open science framework and all the additional materials. And I also recognize what you describe being more vulnerable, in a sense that making it more open also means like, okay, it's my code, it has to be good. But if I've learned one thing in the last couple of 10 years doing open science, is that vulnerability is not necessarily bad. And it's really, now, but it took me a couple of years, I'm very pragmatic in the sense that the main goal is that it's reproducible. And it's not, I mean, it feels like who wants to, I mean, it's very niche, who wants to do that? But you don't know, maybe in 10 years, there's like a very irreproducible finding in your field. I want to go back in your code, and I'm not looking at your code as, oh, this is not nicely annotated, or well, it should be annotated in the sense that I should be able to figure out what you exactly did and why. But I think that's the main goal, and if you keep that in mind, we should definitely do it. And of course, universities should well, fund it or make time for it. Yeah, but how? Yeah. But I think we all agree that that's needed. Jeroen, you want to add?
Yeah, maybe just one thing, because this relates to something that is, I think, is special in open education, and relates to one of my other hobby horses, and that is the importance of having an error-friendly and safe environment, especially online environment. If you, as a condition for people who wanted to share things, wanted to be open. So, and especially for education, I think it's very important, not by pushing open, not to lose the ability for teaching staff to be flexible, and to profit from a safe environment. If I teach a class, I can just in the morning I can adapt my slides a little bit, add some things that happened yesterday, but it's still a little bit well, not well thought. But I just want to add something. It's still ugly. But if I know that will be online, I'm probably not going to do that. And also having some types of discussions that they can be sensitive. And if you know that you have the discussion with a group of students, of say 20 students, just in a building, and it doesn't become part of an open record, that is easier. But if you want to make that part of a fully open course, then you lose some of the flexibility. So there's always a trade-off there. We need to be very aware of that in pushing open education.
True. Sure, great. Thank you so much for your questions and your interest, and we can take it further to the drinks section. But first, I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you for making it here. Thank you for your honest, unbiased, and open opinions. Thank you for not being, not being afraid to be critical and to be sincere. Thank you for joining us, and we'll continue discussing this further. Thanks.